For the second video in this series, looking at a very common question you get asked would be, should I be doing survey research, should I be doing interview research, or should I have mixed methods, should I have focus groups and what have you? The kind of idealistic or principled perspective on this is that you need to do what fits your research question. So the choice of method is dictated by the research question, and that's a model for good science. You know, you have a precise question, and from that, and the way you frame it carefully, there naturally follows a way of answering, a way of addressing that question. Kind of more for me, when it comes to doing a master's dissertation particularly, I think there are kind of more pragmatic considerations which override or make you think more carefully about how you frame the question in terms of what's feasible in relation to method. And the reason I say this is that a lot of people set out thinking that they want to do survey research when they don't have a kind of pre-existing capability or facility to do that. In order to do survey research well, you need to have familiarity with a kind of established set of protocols and procedures, and you need to understand a lot of things in relation to scales and items, questionnaire design, sampling, you know, various different kinds of sampling, and you need to kind of acquire expertise in a technical language which nobody will have unless they've got some kind of prior education that's relevant to that. So what I tend to do with people whom I supervise is ask them to think very carefully about the choice of method in relation to these issues about pre-existing skills. Now, it could be that actually what you do is you use the dissertation as an opportunity to develop skills in survey design and so on, and that's a perfectly legitimate way to think about it. It could also be that you have a sponsor for your dissertation, say, and there's an organisational need or imperative you know, for you to do survey research. It could even be that you think people aren't going to pay attention to the findings unless you do survey research. You know, these kinds of considerations do come in because it's not just about the idealistic. You frame your question perfectly, and from that axiomatically follows a way to address it. Considering interview research, which is something which I tend to advocate people consider unless they have a very strong desire or kind of imperative to do survey research. One of the advantages of this is that we all have a learned facility for conducting conversations. You know, it's being human. You talk to other people, and an interview is essentially a controlled conversation. It's a form of conversation, and so you're starting that with a kind of pre-existing what you might call practical knowledge or practical wisdom about how to carry out that. Now, that's not to say that you'll do it, you know, you'll necessarily do it well, because you need to be awake to some of the limitations and challenges that go with doing interview research. An additional consideration or rider to this is there is no sense in saying that the interview research or qualitative research is in any sense easier. There are, you know, there's a multiplicity of ways of doing qualitative research, and many epistemological positions one can take in relation to qualitative research, i.e. many different ways one can think about whether the claims one makes about interview data are defensible, robust. You know, what can we know about interview data? So there is no sense in which interviews are any easier as a method to do than surveys, or any more difficult. However, there is, in the time frame for a master's dissertation particularly, less of a lead time up to acquiring some of the skills that are core to interviewing, which would be absent in you know, you wouldn't have that same kind of learned understanding in relation to survey research unless you'd done it before or been taught how to do it. Another overriding consideration is it's better to do one thing well than to do several things poorly. So don't fall into the trap of thinking you need to do interviews, questionnaire, and focus groups, for example. Having said that, one thing that you can do in any project is you can do some documentary analysis, look at the existing literature, perhaps in the media or in the policy literature, and see what's been said about the phenomenon before. You know, policy, the news, things like that, legislation, if that's appropriate. Sometimes people talk about this in terms of triangulation, and that's a useful way to think about it, in the sense that you can bear down on a problem from different vantage points, and certainly you'll have something more to say about your data if you don't just base it on the data and the method itself, but you include an additional source of information. However, triangulation implies or means that you converge on a point from different perspectives, different places, but you don't necessarily do that when you have different data sources. Sometimes you diverge. In fact, what can be interesting is if your interviewees, for instance, say something very different from what's said in the public sphere or the public realm. So that's some considerations on choice of method. Should you do surveys or interviews or a mix of methods, and what the role of different methods is in your dissertation.